Welcome to The Impossible Journey, where we dig into the minds of African entrepreneurs who are building sustainable businesses here on the African continent. In this episode, we speak to Chinedu. Chinedu is the co-founder and chief growth officer of Max.ng, a pioneering West Africa mobility startup. Chinedu is building technology and financial infrastructure for the mass mobile market here in Africa. Chinedu takes us through the several ways and paths in which he had to follow in order for his business to disrupt mobility here on the African continent. Chinedu, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on The Impossible Journey.
Thank you.
All right, so tell us about Max.ng.
So Max actually stands for Metro Africa Express. We are a technology and finance organization. Essentially, we build technology and finance to drive and power mobility. And the vision for us is to power Africa's forward movement. To date, we've onboarded over 2,000 to 3,000 drivers today. And we work in different vehicle categories as much as including motorcycles, tricycles, electric motorcycles now, and very soon we'll make some more announcements. We're also the first company to commercially roll out electric mobility on the continent. We've done this in a community called Bamu in Ogun State, where we have, I think, just under 20 motorcycles working today. Electric motorcycles, fully powered, solar powered and all that. And we have a couple more that will be rolling out. Those motorcycles, by the way, are locally made in Nigeria. We made them ourselves in our facilities in Oregon. And essentially where we see this going is, continue to scale our capacity to both organize and formalize informal transportation, right? By providing the technology to do that and providing the financial systems to be able to lease and lend to those to that part of the world, right? And if you think about what drives that decision or what drives that, right? Drivers in particular are a particularly marginalized community across Africa, right? If you think about how a lot of these people grow up or how a lot of us grow up, corruption is also so heavily embedded in the culture that the people develop all these complexes where the policeman will teach the people on the road that he's Oga, right? The lady who's barely making it by, who can afford a house, afford someone to come take care of her family for her, maybe clean the house, all that stuff, loads that over her, right? So in general, drivers are one of the communities that are heavily loaded over. And for us, we believe that we want to be able to essentially help them transform their lives and go from one stage in life to the next stage in life. The work we do around lending and financial empowerment for this particular drivers will be critical to help them become more successful long term. So we're a technology and finance organization targeting drivers today.
And that is fascinating because it's technology and finance, that's the infrastructure behind it. But there's also an element of social impact as well, because you're trying to change not only the landscape of public transportation, but you're also trying to have a positive impact on people's lives and make a difference and somewhat bring them out of some level of social economic status that they're currently in. And that's an amazing thing. But for an individual like yourself with your background, where you started off educationally, how can you now connect your story from the point at which you were at university, and I believe you were studying electrical engineering, you wanted to be an astronaut. So how do you now connect that particular aspect of your life to where you are now?
So that's very interesting. So I'll kind of go a bit about that through that journey, so kind of carry you along. So, as a kid, I originally wanted to be an astronaut. I remember my mom, I still have the telescopes. My mom would buy all these telescopes in the family house.
You've always been looking towards the stars.
Look at the stars, always wanted to hang out, be up there.
Right.
And it was interesting. So when I got into high school, or secondary school in Nigeria, I joined things like the Stargazers clubs and participated in all that. And I remember particularly building this weird contraption that was somewhere between a motorcycle and a plane. And I was trying to figure out how to make it fly.
Right.
And I went to my science teacher. I think his name was Mr. Essien at the time. And the conversation we had, he essentially said to me, "Oh, this is not possible. You should focus on this stuff. Go and become an engineer and start with current." And I thought to myself, this guy clearly doesn't know what's going on here.
Right.
I ended up spending a lot of time in the library trying to figure out what that looked like for me. And when it got to the time to decide to go to university, I wanted to be an astronaut, right? And I remember having this conversation with my mom about how, you're my only son, you're our oldest child, we want you to be home, to be able to, grow with us and all those kind of different things, or be closer. So for me, that conversation essentially killed anything as far as astronomy was concerned. I'm like, you know what? Great, I'll be an aeronautic engineer. She's like, well, as an aeronautic engineer, you're not going to be home,
Right.
because Nigeria doesn't have the setup and all that. And so for me, went through this conversation where, okay, I'll think about what I wanted to do. So for a bit, I thought, okay, I'll be a doctor. My dad is a doctor, my mom is a doctor, so it made sense to do that. And I realized that despite the fact that I was knowledgeable with biology and into science and all that stuff, I just didn't have the interest enough for that. Because like becoming a doctor is a vocation; it's not necessarily a job, right? And so I figured, I have to be practical. So I asked a lot of advice and ended up going with electrical engineering. And electrical engineering for me made sense because it is the most diverse electrical engineering degree you can have.
Right.
It allows you to almost do anything. You can work in finance, you can work in technology, you can do all sorts
Because
of
it gives you
different
the foundation to be able
Exactly.
to be mobile, yeah.
Exactly. So I started that out in photo, and then I tried to transfer unsuccessfully. On paper, I transferred. In practice, I went to start again.
Right.
Right, because my
The
paper was
credits, the credits didn't go over.
Well, the credits would have gone if the transcripts came in time, but there was this whole shakedown that I just wasn't going to be a part of. So I moved out to the States and started again. Right. Started out as an electrical engineer again. Took all the classes. I'd done most of the stuff in a different market, different context, right? So I'd done a lot of this stuff. So it was a lot of learning. It was a lot of review, not necessarily learning from the ground up. And I think by the third year, I decided I wanted to add computer engineering or computer science to that mix. Right. I ended up graduating from Illinois Tech in 2012 with a dual degree in electrical engineering and computer engineering. And then went on to work at Barclays Capital. So as a student, I had done work at Goldman Sachs and worked on the credit derivatives desk, right?
So that's where your finance background comes from.
That's also a lot that came from, right? And then while I was in school, I worked as an iOS engineer at a startup that got acquired by Microsoft, right? So I had enough, I guess, experience in that sense. So when I went to Barclays, I worked, on I think cash equities team, essentially building technology for trading. Worked in Delta One, so Delta One on the Barclays, Delta One team, which essentially dealt with prime brokerage, risk management, all that stuff. Built a lot of systems that help the bank trade and provide liquidity to their customers, and got very interested in finance. So I think in 2013, I decided that, you know what, I wanted to move back to Nigeria, and I had this whole conversation with my parents, and they're like, no, you can't come back yet. But I'm thinking, wait, I thought the idea was for me to come back, right? That's why I didn't do all this highfalutin things I was thinking initially, right? And they convinced me to essentially to go back to school.
Okay.
So I applied to do an MBA, a couple places, and a Masters in Finance in a couple places. I got accepted to almost everywhere I applied to, except one, right? So I got accepted to MIT Sloan to do finance. And I'm like, look, I'm happy to do this. It's 1 year. I'm not like
Exactly right.
technically it's 3 semesters, but that's 1 year.
We do it during the summer.
Yeah. Exactly. Instead of doing 4 semesters, 2 years,
2 years, right.
I wasn't ready for that. To be very honest, I don't like school. Never really liked school. All right. So I went to MIT, did the year, and in that year, I spent that year pursuing what I wanted to do in Nigeria. Right. So I went into MIT thinking.
So you're saying you started formulating your plan as far back as then?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So I wanted to move back to Nigeria in 2013 because I wanted to move back and start a business, right? I'd been looking at the agriculture space at the time. I was interested in biodiesels and how they could use, and because Nigeria was going through this whole deregulation process, especially with the diesel space. And I thought to myself, what if we process palm oil or used algae to produce biodiesel? That would be as an alternative to this regular diesel. So I spent some time in Nigeria doing research, but I didn't move back immediately, right? So 2014. While I was in school, I kind of gone through the biodiesel, run the math. While it was an interesting industry, a lot of what the infrastructure needed to make that successful didn't exist. So I said I wasn't going to pursue it yet. And I looked at rice production, because we also had a lot of this stuff going on with Mr. Dishon at the time, who was the Minister of Agriculture. He was an amazing work, and I really loved the work he was doing. I think Amaka used to work for him at the time as well, right? So I was very excited about what they were doing. I was thinking to myself, how can I tap into this stuff? So there's the agriculture piece, doing a lot of research there. And my mom works in the Ministry of Health, right? And she's so passionate about her work, right? And a lot of what she was doing then was looking at statistics and saying, how do you drive down infant and maternal mortality, right? And, you could see where you look at data from, I had those conversations with her where she would show data about how, this market in this particular geopolitical zone, we had done well 6 years ago, but right now everything is going to hell. Another part, what was happening. And I started to think to myself, how can I build a business that specifically targets the mother and the child, where you're able to provide support for early mothers and for their children all the way to 9 years old. Why 9 years old? You found that up to the age of 5, there was massive mortality. That's when a lot of mortality does happen.
Slow down
right?
after 5.
And after 5, it slows down. But like for children, they don't really come out of that process until they turn 10. So they're able to support them through the ages 0 to 9. And then when they turn 10, happy birthday, congratulations, you're out of our program. It wasn't going to be a program in the sense that you had to go to school or anything, but essentially they would register with us and we would essentially provide the support and the guidance that they kind of needed to be able to get their children through that process. You know, feeding, formula, education, all sorts of things. That's the idea. But for the life of me, we couldn't figure out how to you move things around. And I had the same problem with agriculture. How do you move things around? How do you bring things into the country? How do you take things out of the country? How do you move things around within the country? And I hadn't lived in Nigeria in a commercial sense. So I was a kid here, grew up here, but I hadn't tried to do business here. And so at the time I was at Sloan, and I was asking a lot of my friends, like, you were in Nigeria, how do you do this? How does Jumia move stuff? How does Congo move stuff? And everyone was like, I don't know, and I'm not planning to move back, so peace out, right? And then someone introduced me to, a friend of a friend said to me, hey, look, there's this guy called Tayo. He was part of the team. He was at Conga this past summer, right? I'll do an introduction to him. I was like, oh, fantastic, right? So they made the introduction. Tayo and I sat down, had a very interesting conversation, a fantastic conversation. It was about 20 minutes. We were there for like maybe an hour and a half, right? And it was a lot of, we really connected, right? He had been part of the team that rolled out Conga's logistics business. So he came with this mentality of he wants to build a business.
Which was the bedrock of their business.
Exactly, right? And he came in with this thing of he wanted to build a capacity for logistics. E-commerce is growing in Africa, yada, yada, yada. Fantastic. I was thinking to myself, great. I'm just thinking, how the hell do I build a system so I can build other things on top of it, right? So he was working on a class project. I was working on a different class project. And I was like, look, I will volunteer for your class project. So I joined his class project. I never attended class. I would literally just go for presentations. But other than that, I wasn't in class. I wasn't registered to take the class. I did all the homework with them, did all the projects with them. Because for me, I wanted to build a business. I wanted to build a business that would transform people's lives and would take people from one cadre in their life to the next cadre, which was why I was particularly focused on what areas can we come and do this where we create massive jobs and save lives, which was why I looked at agriculture and the mother and child, right? And so suddenly logistics became something that we could do the same, right? So I said, well, guys, I do technology. I came in saying I'm a finance guy, right? So all the financial models, the data analysis, reviews, yada, 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 I did all that stuff. And then, it went from a class project to, I think at the end of 2014, I told Tyler, like, dude, I'm doing this full time. You're out, but I'm doing this full time, right? And I stopped recruiting. I remember I came back to Nigeria, spent Christmas and New Year's here. So MIT gives you 6 weeks off, essentially, at that period, because most people take the January months to do internships.
Got it.
So that month, I was doing internships, but market research really. I was interning at an investment bank in Lagos, and then, really spending a lot of my time outside the office, going to meet the folk at Jumia and the folk at Conga, and I met a lot of people who have stayed on as lifelong friends so far, right? It was an interesting experience. I also wanted to understand why on earth e-commerce was growing. So I used to go everywhere in a Danfo or an Okada. And oh my God, I lost 4 suits in Danfos in a month because I'm 6'6". So I'm rushing to sit in front.
It's gonna rip.
And then that whole, you sit down, you're finally grateful you have a seat, but your suit is ripped, all right? And so he said, look, this struggle is really not worth it. And it makes sense to me that e-commerce is growing, all right? And so I was sold, and I was like, we're going to do this. And then, Tyler had been in Brazil that period, and then went to the UK for something. Long story short, July 21st, we flew back to Nigeria, right, to kick off Max. And August 3rd, 2015, we officially started Max with myself, Tayo, and I think we had hired 1 or 2 drivers at the time. And that entire week, we did a drum roll. Can I get a drum roll? Drum roll of, I think, 2 deliveries the entire week. Yeah. It was harrowing because nobody expected. We thought we were going to be doing 10 orders a day, 20 orders a day. The entire week we did 2.
It's a slow growth.
Woo! Yeah. It was painful. Yeah. Obviously, looking back on that, I understand why we did 2 deliveries, right? We didn't have the money to do a big bang launch or announcement, marketing, all that stuff.
And even then, it still doesn't guarantee.
And it doesn't guarantee, right? But yeah, so essentially, for me, I went through from wanting to be an astronaut to becoming an electrical engineer, to becoming a doctor, to becoming an electrical engineer, to working in tech as a software engineer or working in finance as a software engineer, becoming a finance professional, um, and essentially an entrepreneur, right? So I've kind of done a lot of different things. And for me, I find that the experience, the movement, all that stuff has been very valuable because I'm able to move from conversation to conversation
Right.
and I'm able to maintain context. And essentially, that's what essentially my role as the chief growth officer at Max effectively is. So I lead our engineering work and our product work, product being strategy, engineering being like building, like skill, like scaling, right? But I also do a lot of work, like lead our sales team, which is focused on, actually scaling our revenue and all that. And our driver operations, which is focused on retaining our drivers. So everything around like bringing in drivers, retaining them, and giving us the ability to grow is what I focus on. I'm at the business.
I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, and it's important and interesting to hear that journey and to see how that story is connected because it speaks to you trying to now tap into solving an actual problem, which is what gave birth to not only your entrepreneurial drive, but also at the same time the birth of the organization in which you run as a co-founder and also as the chief growth officer,
Right.
now being specific with regards to how you want to now grow this business. But speaking about the business and also speaking about your journey and the experiences you've had, you talking about getting on downfalls and everything else, doing business in Nigeria, it's something we all hear too much of, the difficulties, the struggles, and everything else. From your experience in your entrepreneurial journey, would you like to share one or two instances that now tap into that difficulty of doing business in Nigeria?
Absolutely. So, doing business for in Nigeria is not for the faint of heart, right? It is effectively going to war. So when you think about it, right, why do you go to war? We go to war because we disagree on an ideology on how we want to do something, and we can't reach any reasonable any reasonable compromise. And so you go to war and fight it, and one person wins, right? With Nigeria, the business that we're building today, right, essentially transforms an informal sector
Yes, it does.
to more formal. It brings in transparency, right, provides access to capital, and grows the pie. A lot of how Nigeria is set up tax is to take from the pie as much as you can and for yourself and for your family. So not enough people focus on growing the pie. If you're going to focus on growing the pie, you're literally fighting a war where you're
It's the
forcing
very
the
definition of
country to do
disruption.
something different. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? To go against its own natural tendency. Um, and so for us, I mean, it's an extreme sport to be an entrepreneur in Nigeria. No, I love it. I wouldn't do it differently. Like I wouldn't not be an entrepreneur here, right? I love it, right? Because I think there's a lot that I've learned, right, that I would really not have learned anywhere else, right? And for me, part of building Max, building this business is about creating jobs, creating impact, right, and changing lives. And where better to do that than where you're from, right, Nigeria. But it's been challenging. So I mean, I know when people think about Max, the first thing they want to talk about is regulation, right? So let's go to that.
Okay.
There are no federal laws in Nigeria today that guide motorcycle operations.
Right.
So how motorcycles operate and tricycles are heavily at the discretion of the states, right? That brings in a lot of challenges, right? Because you see, it means that at the federal level, there's no strategy guiding transportation outside cars, um,
And
airplanes,
trains.
and trains. They don't really care about anything else, right? Now they should care about everything, right?
Given that majority of the population move
Exactly.
and utilize these services.
Exactly. I
Right.
mean, by government data in Lagos alone, about half of Lagos's population moves around on foot. So we should have proper walkways and all those things, right? You have about something like maybe 65% of the population, 70% of the population. Their main core access to transport beyond foot is motorcycles and tricycles, right? Um, the car owning or car driving part of the population is a massive minority,
I like
right?
that. Yeah.
And
Because it's
then
true.
yeah,
It's
it's
a
a
very
massive
massive
minority.
minority. Yeah.
I mean, you think about 25 million people in Lagos. And in Lagos, there are what 1.8 million cars, right? That's one car for every 12.5 people,
Yes.
right? And the car capacity is what 4 people. So obviously not, right? Doesn't make sense. And then maybe 40% of the population moves around with buses. That tells you a lot, right? So at the beginning of so last year, 2019 June, we raised about $7.58 million to bring total capital raised to something like $10 million, right? And we spent, we levered up, invested in bringing on vehicles. So I think we made an investment worth something like an additional $4 million worth for vehicles, right? And we were excited about that. The capacity, the change, what that was going to do. We're deploying something like maybe I think on average of like 20 drivers a day at some point, right? So we were growing rapidly, right? We expanded from Lagos. We went into Akure. We rolled out Kano in November, or in October, November. We started Ibadan November, December of 2019. It was a great year. We come into 2020. So with the Christmas holidays, business kind of goes to hell. Goes to hell in the sense that a lot of people move to their villages. Typically, the Igbos leave Lagos and go to the southeast.
Especially the people that utilize these services.
Essentially, right? So you think about traders and all these guys. A lot of people are going home from the southeast. A lot of people are traveling home to the north to go spend time with their parents. A lot of people are traveling out across the southwest, and Lagos essentially becomes a city for the IGGBs, right? And they're not gonna get on the Okadas. So the kind of businesses that we're in, Christmas is not a good time. So business for us doesn't really restart in the new year until about the third week of January.
Yeah.
Right?
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky. So think about it see us as the third week of January, we're just really beginning to restart the business, right, for the year. I mean, we've been available, working and all that, but when we're looking at the revenue numbers, the activity rate, the numbers don't start to look like they need to start looking until towards the end of the third week. And at the end of the third week, the government goes and the state government makes an announcement, essentially declaring our businesses illegal in the state. Keep in context that October the year before, so 2019 October, the governor had gone on one of the largest platforms in the country to declare that they will partner and work with businesses like us, right? And much earlier than that, we had also spent time visiting with the governor. We were doing all this work with the Ministry of Transportation to ensure that we were properly regulated. We welcomed regulation as a business, right? But the government had to do what the government had to do. When it comes to things like security, there's very little wiggle room, right? And that's what the government.
And that was the entire narrative.
So for the government's point of view, there was a big security problem, right? Obviously, we were of the opinion that we could work together to solve that. But you have to respect what the government chooses to do. So as part of that, the government declared us persona non grata, and we need to get our bikes off the road. Now, the typical motorcycle, when we deploy them on the road, it takes us about 18 months to actually start to make profit on them, right? Even if in 18 months we will break even, that was still fine. So for us, it was a shock that we were given about 5 days to get something like 2,000 vehicles off the road in Lagos. It was amazing. It seems unbelievable, right? And we pursued this, let's talk, let's resolve the issue, and nobody was interested in talking to us, right? I mean, today we have, I think, about $6.3 million worth of vehicles in a warehouse that we're trying to figure out how to move, right? And we will figure out what to do with them, right? It will take some time, but we'll get that right? But regulation for us is something we expect and welcome, right? But I think we just went. We didn't prepare well, or we were outplayed when it came to that in Lagos. And it's been a big learning for us, right? Because now, regulation, government relationship is something that Tayo, myself, and the rest of the executive team spend a lot of time thinking about, and spending time understanding how to execute on, right? Because affliction cannot come a second time. If affliction comes again, there are no guarantees that we'll be able to survive or bounce back, right? And if you look at our competitors, most of our competitors will wipe out, at least at scale. I mean, OP is completely pulled out of that business. Gokada is,
you had to repurpose to something,
yeah, but if you think about it, we also run logistics. We started as a logistics business and run logistics for longer than anyone. The entire on-demand logistics business, we started that industry, right? The challenge with on-demand logistics is that the average person is poor in Nigeria. In fact, there's no middle class. Middle class is in Canada. The Nigerian middle class is in Canada and London, in the US. They're not here, right? So what's left here is the uber wealthy.
And everybody else.
Unfortunately, we're considered uber wealthy in Nigeria, even though, I know that I don't have money like that. And I assume, we're kind of figuring things out, right? In most other parts of the world, we'll be middle class. So what's left here is, folks like us who are few and far between, and then a majority of people who are very poor, or poor. I mean, and poor essentially means they make less than 250,000 naira a year in income, which is incredible to think. I mean, that's less than $500. right? I mean, by most
People are
of them,
surviving off of
and
that.
people survive off of that,
Sending their kids to
right?
school with
Sending
it.
their schools, but the question is, what kind of schools, right? Which creates a cycle of poverty, wickedness, evil. Like it's just
It's
incredible.
very difficult to break.
Exactly, right? Um, so coming back to that, there's so many people who are poor. So on-demand logistics as a business doesn't even make sense because the average person can't even afford that.
So let me ask you, so is that what you guys did? You shifted more to your on-demand business while you're still trying to figure out what to do with your actual...
We knew that business was dead.
Okay.
The on-demand business for us is a business that we know um, as a business model doesn't make too much sense in this market. It makes sense at a global level, but people see Nigeria and think 200 million people. In practice, you want to think 10 million people. Actually, you want to think 5 million people who can actually afford the service, right? When you think about that and say that maybe a quarter of those people are in Lagos and the rest are spread across the country, you're looking at, in Lagos, or 5 million people, looking at 1.25 million people who can afford the service. The question is, do they need the service? Because you can afford it, means you can send your driver to go do it as well, right?
Which is true.
So do they need that? So maybe 10% of that population needs it, right? So if you go from 1.25 to 125,000 people, right? But how often do you actually need to send a package? If you need to send a package, maybe you need to send a package maybe once a month, right? Of those, so if you take out people who are sending once a month, who will be the majority, apply the power rule, only 20% of those people will probably need to do a delivery once a month, and let's say they are small businesses. So 20% of 125,000 is 12,005 times 4, right? Which is, no, times 2, yeah. 25,000 people. So only 25,000 people. So you have DHL, FedEx, GIG, Max, UPS, Gokada, and like thousands of other businesses fighting for 25,000 deliveries, possibly a month, right? Let's take into account that's 25,000 deliveries probably includes businesses like Jumia and all that, right? You quickly begin to get the context that is a very mega industry. Take into account that as a business, we were doing something like 30,000 rides a day before the ban, right? And that changes the narrative completely. So you go from having a driver who completes 25 rides a day to having a driver struggling to do 15 deliveries in a day, right? And at 25 rides a day, you could afford to have 20,000, 50,000 drivers even if you wanted, right? But with deliveries, you can only afford maybe like 100 drivers, 200 drivers. The narrative is completely different.
So what has that done to your business model? So what have you pivoted towards doing after the regulation?
So I'm going to be honest and say that, while we were figuring out what we wanted to do and how to pivot that business, COVID hit. And in a sense, slowed down the entire economy, right? Shut down, essentially. Right. So while we were figuring out and coming up with how to respond to that, COVID was hitting. So a lot of other things were also shutting down or slowing down, which also meant that we had a lot more time to respond, right? Now, we responded by doubling down in our on-demand logistics business. We knew it wasn't, that's not what we're going to scale, right, with, but it was potentially a way to show up revenues, right?
So essentially,
we tested things.
No, the question I'm asking is that because it kind of segues into the next point about COVID and the impact COVID has had.
Okay.
So you guys were already in that.
We were already in COVID.
You were in COVID.
In January, we were in COVID.
You were in COVID
before COVID became a thing.
All right, got it.
We were ahead of.
Okay, you were ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
Yeah, got it. Right. Okay. So it's not like COVID had an impact because you guys were already there.
We were already there.
So you were pretty much like, welcome to the party, guys.
Exactly.
Right.
So when COVID hit, everybody was complaining. We're like, come join us.
Have a seat.
Friends.
Right. Okay.
I mean, honestly, that's such a serious thing to joke about.
We can laugh about it now. It wasn't funny a few months ago.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Uh-huh.
Right? So while there was the fight, we want to work with government, figure things out, going on one side, there was the other, the entire other conversation of how do we respond to this, right? Because something we've learned is, as entrepreneurs, you need to have short-term memory. If you allow things become trauma for you, you will stay stagnant. You
never move forward
and try to solve that problem, right? You must have short-term memory where this thing has happened. Pack, right? How do I navigate? Because if you don't navigate, you have 100, 200 people depending on you for salaries. You have thousands of drivers who are depending on you to be able to feed their families, all that stuff, and everybody's stuck, right? So we needed to be able to, one, navigate past those issues, right? And two, figure out what the right way to go was, right? So we essentially packed that to one side and had that be someone else's focus and not the executive focus, right? Right. While if they needed to show up, we'll show up and all that. and we started to pursue a few other opportunities. So we started pursuing something called, we started pursuing a SaaS play that essentially would allow us to use all the technology we built and the financing to help governments regulate that industry. Because you see, if government can regulate, they will ban. So how do we stop government from banning? We help them regulate.
There you go.
So we figured we could leverage the technology we built, the operations we built, and the finance we built to go from state to state and say to governments, look, don't ban, let's regulate. We'll help you regulate. We'll help you organize. We'll help you license. We'll help you do all the things. We have all the systems. We've built them, right? So we did that, right? So as a result, we're rolling out in Ekiti State, something called MetroGov, right? That should happen at the end of this month. So that's great. We also started we've been working on electric mobility for almost 2 years now. So it was a great chance for us to ramp up some of that work. We rolled out in other cities. So we're in Akure, we're in Kano, we're in Ibadan. Beyond Lagos, we're in Akure, Kano, Ibadan, and now Bamu and Ekiti, right? And in Ibadan as a business, we ramped up aggressively. So we're at something like half a thousand drivers working in Ibadan now, and that's growing exponentially day by day, right? We doubled down a bit on on-demand logistics, and that turned out to be a waste of our money. So we stopped doubling down and just let that be, right? And we continue to work with folks like Jumia. We're Jumia's largest delivery partner in the country, right? And so we just doubled down more to make sure we're giving better service, make sure we can retain all these people while we continue to grow our business. So what we've done is expand our fleet in other cities and expand people in other cities. Obviously, COVID affected those businesses in other cities, right? Where Lagos was initially about 80% of our revenue, then today that's completely gone, right? So COVID affected business in other cities, but we're very sensitive to when can we start, we continue operation or we recover, and we recovered very quickly in the cities. Outside Kano, of course, right? We've started a SaaS play that we're deploying right now. So electricity.
So fortunately for you guys, because it's interesting whenever people talk about post-COVID, there is no such thing as post-COVID.
Absolutely not.
COVID has come and completely changed the world we're in now. So I think essentially what you're saying is that you guys have now repurposed and you've had to pivot towards these new initiatives and begin to figure out strategies to now scale.
Correct.
Fortunately, unfortunately, however you want to depend to look at it, is that you were already doing these things before everyone else was kind of forced to.
Exactly.
So you already had your preemptive strike happen to you that got you maybe a 2-3 month head start against everybody.
Exactly.
And then that maybe now redefines how the business move forward and what you guys are doing into the future.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, look, it's been fantastic and interesting speaking to you, and I really do hope that everybody has been able to learn from your story, from your experience. It's always interesting to have these honest conversations, to be able to now get a very good sense and a good grip on what it means to truly, truly, truly run a business empire or build a business empire here in Africa, specifically in Nigeria, and also to be an entrepreneur, and how you can now tell that connected story from where you are coming from to where you want to get to.
Exactly.
So Chinedu, thank you so much for being on The Impossible Journey. All right, thank you.
You.
And that wraps it up. Wonderful conversation. So join us next time on The Impossible Journey, where we continue to have more honest conversations with entrepreneurs in Nigeria and the experiences that they go through.